There are about 1.5 billion people in the world that call themselves Christian, but far, far too many of them don't know what Christ taught. Far too many of them don't read the four Gospels, or they read all kinds of other Christian books, but reading the four Gospels seems too big a trouble for many of them. Yes, sadly to say, many Christians are biblical illiterates. They don't know what the Bible says. They don't read the Gospels. They don't know what Jesus Christ taught and said. And that's a contradiction. Surely, if you call yourself a Christian, which means that you are a follower of Christ, you should know what he taught and what he preached. We have come to Luke chapter 20. I'll pick it up in verse 22. Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Somebody said to Jesus. But he perceived their craftiness and said unto them, why do you tempt me, try me? Why do you try to trip me up? Show me a penny. Whose image and superscription is upon it? And they answered and said to him, well, Caesar's. And Jesus answered them and said, render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things which are God's. We, as Christians, are to be good citizens. If you read the New Testament, surely you will be able to see that. There's many different passages where you should be able to see that we are to be respectable, good citizens under the government that we live under. Now, let's go back to the time of Christ and the Roman Empire. It was the 1st century AD. The Roman Empire hadn't degenerated yet into the bestiality that it did degenerate into. Take the example now. You should, if you're reading the New Testament and the Gospels, realize that the Jewish religion was allowed. The Roman Empire that now incorporated the Holy Land, it allowed the Jews to continue their religion. They could continue to have their temple. They could continue to have their sacrifices in that temple, the priesthood. They could continue to keep the Sabbath day. They could continue as a religious people with their religion. The Roman Empire allowed it. All that the Roman Empire wanted from the Jews at that time was that they would be good citizens. We are, as Christians, to be good citizens under the government that we are under. Now, I'm going to read some other passages to you, but I want you to understand, first of all, these passages I'm going to read have a context. Obviously, these passages I will read could not and should not be obeyed and followed under a government like Hitler and his government that brought in the Second World War. It's not applied to anything like that. A bestial dictatorship that does literally evil things and just kills people without thinking about it, that is an evil government. We are, as the New Testament teaches us, and the book of Acts teaches us, where it was written in the book of Acts, it is written, that we should obey God before man. Where man's laws come in conflict with God's laws, we are to obey God first. But otherwise, if those laws do not conflict any of God's laws, we should be good citizens of our country. And most of our countries, the Western world, the countries of the Western world are, in an overall way, pretty decent. I mean, we have freedom. to worship God. I have freedom right now to record this video and to put it out to you. We have freedom of religion. Our governments try to have people a good life, shall we say. They try to make sure that we have laws and statutes and city bylaws that are in the large over all of it, helping us to have a good life in the countries in the Western world that we live in. Many good laws that they bring in, and we should respect that. They are trying to give our life some balance and a good life overall. No matter what government it is that's ruling your nation, whatever party it is that's ruling, overall, people want to have a decent life. And our governments of the Western world try to do that. But in so doing, certain laws have to be brought in so as overall we can have a good life. And God expects us to be good citizens. And sadly to say, under this COVID, some Christians are not being good citizens. They are being selfish. They're not loving their neighbor. And that is completely contrary to what Jesus taught. He taught that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's the attitude Jesus says we are to have if we are followers of him. And indeed, sadly to say, many who say they are followers of Christ do not believe that, and they do not practice it. They do not love their neighbors. It seems they're not concerned about their neighbors. It's all me, 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 and to hell with everybody else. Over to Romans chapter 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. They're allowed to be there of God. Whosoever therefore resists the power, resists the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works. If you are being a good citizen, you don't have to be afraid of the police and the government, handing out, slapping you with this penalty or that penalty. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil, to the ones that break these laws of society that are not against the laws of God. Will you not know and be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and you shall have praise of the same. If you are a good citizen, you're going to have praise from the local authorities. Verse 4, for he is the minister of God, the servant of God in certain ways, to you for good. But if you do that which is evil, then you better be afraid. You better be watching out, because it's going to happen to you. What is it? He is not the word in vain, for he is the minister, the servant of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon them that do evil. If you're going to be an evil citizen, then you're going to come under wrath. It's just as pure and simple as that. Verse 5, wherefore we must needs be subject, not only for wrath, not only for the punishment that might come upon us, but also for conscience sake, to be a child of God, and he wants us to be a good citizen. Verse 6, for this cause pay you tribute, pay your taxes, for they are God's servants or God's ministers. They're doing a certain job that allows them under God to be doing. God allows them to put down these certain laws that are really overall for the benefit of all of us. So render therefore to their dues, tribute to tribute, custom to custom, Fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Over to 1 Peter chapter 2, picking it up in verse 12. Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that, whereas they speak evil of you as evildoers, they may see your good works, which they shall behold, and then glorify God one day in visitation. Maybe when God calls them, they will realize that you were indeed obeying God by being good citizens, good Christian citizens. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. Now, obviously, the context of the New Testament, every ordinance of man that is not against the ordinance of God, that does not conflict the ordinance of God. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, or unto them that are sent by them to give punishment upon evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so it is the will of God, that with well-doing, being a good citizen, keeping the laws of your country, that do not break the laws of God, doing indeed well, you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness. And some are doing that today. They say that we are free to congregate together. We are free not to wear these masks. You know, we're free to do these things. We shouldn't be told that we have to do these things. We're free, they want to say. But here, God's word says, as free, yes, you are free in certain ways, and not using your liberty as a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Now, some of the things that we have in our societies that are not against the laws of God. You talk about freedom. We have speed limits that go by schools at a certain speed. You are to obey them. If you don't, you're going to get a ticket. Traffic lights. You're to stop when there's a red light. You're to go when there's a green light. It's not against the law of God. Speed limits. We have speed limits that you are to obey. You obey them, you're fine. The police are happy. You disobey them, you're going to get a penalty. We have in Canada, most of Canada, what we now call driver distraction. You can't be on your smartphone driving down the highway. We have a law now that says you cannot do that. Driver distraction law, it's called. We have a seatbelt law. You're supposed to wear your seatbelts. You'll get a penalty if you don't. You women, you can't go topless walking down the street. You can't go into malls and shopping centers topless at any time of the year. Even if it's 110 degrees outside, you can't do it. You can't relieve yourself. You cannot urinate and defecate any way you like on the streets or any place. You can't do it. It's against the law. Cruelty to animals. We have laws against cruelty to animals. You can get fined and you can get a penalty if you are found being cruel to animals. We have city bylaws. We can't put in this city of Calgary, we can't just go out and put big, huge signs up, whatever we like, sign on our front lawn. And when it comes to street cleaning, you're supposed to move your vehicles. They tell you in advance, you're supposed to move your vehicles so they can clear the street. If you don't, you can get a penalty. We have parking restrictions. If you're handicapped, you can't park in the handicapped unless you have a handicap sticker. We have laws for our national parks to keep them looking nice. And we have pet laws. In Calgary, you can't have a cat walking around the streets. You have cats that are indoor cats. You're not allowed to let them walk around the streets. We have these laws. We have now laws under this COVID virus situation. And these laws of wearing a mask, social distancing, are not against any law of God in the Bible. You can't find it there in the Bible. You cannot find that the law of God says you're not to wear a mask. It's not there. And so, consequently, our societies bring in laws that try to help under this COVID virus. And we as good citizens should be obeying them. You can have church services in your house. You can go on Zoom. You can still keep your religion. You don't have to congregate as a big congregation of 100 or 200 or 300. You can indeed obey these laws that the governments have set down to try to help us through this terrible virus. And we should be, as good citizens, obeying those laws.